Diarmuid, my name is James Nagle, welcome to The Irish Nation Lives. After months of arguing and legal troubles, on the 17th of January 1920, the bond drive was finally ready to begin. As the Irish government was not recognised by the United States, it was illegal to sell bonds there for the Irish Republic, a problem solved by a young lawyer named Franklin D. Roosevelt. He advised the sale of non-interest paying bond certificates, which would be redeemable for gold bonds on the recognition of the Irish Republic. The mayor of New York purchased the first bond certificate on the 17th of January as he presented Eamon de Valera with the freedom of the city, and the following day a 3-hour rally was held to drum up publicity. Many within the United States, however, were disturbed by a foreign entity raising money in the name of a non-existent government, especially one that was hostile to a major ally in the recent World War. Mississippi Senator John Sharp Williams expressed this best when he asked if de Valera and the Irish delegation could be indicted for missions of military enterprise against the dominions of a foreign state at peace with the United States. The legality of the bond drive was challenged repeatedly in the Wall Street Journal, and Alderman W.F. Quinn of New York City, himself of Irish descent, declared, "A bond issue is a financial lien against a tangible property. The misty dream of a deluded agitator is not, and never can be called, security for a bond issue." While they were far from the soundest financial investment, regardless of their legality, Irish Americans invested in their droves. Throughout the United States, bank accounts were opened in the name of Eamon de Valera and were eventually filled with $5.1 million raised by over 300,000 subscribers. This required the nationwide mobilisation of the Irish American community and a massive effort by dedicated organisers and promoters. Raising the money would be a lot easier than getting it to Ireland, however. While much of it was sent disguised as gifts, donations or legal settlements, more than 50% of the total sum raised was still in the United States on de Valera's departure. There it would remain until 1927, when a legal battle over who should control it broke out. But for now, de Valera appeared to be on the rise. As he promoted the bond drive, also known as the Irish Loan, he was showered with accolades and received the freedom of multiple cities. Irish American groups fought over which would raise the most money in the cause of Irish freedom. While refusing to grant him an audience, the US government also steered clear of taking any action against de Valera or his delegation, possibly fearful of the backlash from the support that he had built up. But unknowns to anyone, this was the high point of de Valera's time in the United States. From here, it will be all downhill. De Valera and the leadership of the Irish American movement had maintained an icy relationship since his arrival the previous June. De Valera accused Judge Cohallan and John Devoy of being more interested in American politics than the plight of Ireland, while they believed that he was driven by power and wanted to control the movement to appease his own ego. There's a bit of truth in what both sides say. It was clear that a conflict was coming, and in February of 1920, de Valera gave his opponents the ammunition with which to fire the opening shots. On the 5th of February, de Valera was asked for an interview by a journalist with the Westminster Gazette, a prominent London daily. De Valera gave him a draft of a pamphlet he was working on and encouraged him to use this as the basis of his article. Amongst other points, the pamphlet gave the following solution to British fears that an independent Ireland would be used against them by their enemies. The United States, by the Monroe Doctrine, made provision for its security without depriving the southern Latin republics of their independence and their life. The United States safeguarded itself from the possible use of the Cuba island as a base for attack by a foreign power. Why doesn't Britain do with Ireland as the United States did with Cuba? Why doesn't Britain declare a Monroe Doctrine for her neighbouring island? The people of Ireland, so far from objecting, would cooperate with their whole soul. What de Valera had failed to understand, however, was that the journalist he gave this pamphlet to also worked for the New York Globe. They ran the story first on the 6th of February under the headline, "De Valera opens the door." His invoking of the Monroe Doctrine, in which the United States warned Europe against interfering in the newly independent South American nations, was seen as a withdrawal by the official head of the Irish Republic of the demand that Ireland be set free to decide her own international relations. Worse still was his reference to Cuba. A protectorate of the United States following the Spanish-American War, Cuba was granted independence in 1902 only after constitutional changes were made, giving the US control of economic and foreign policy and the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. To those who read the article, De Valera appeared to be willing to accept much less than an independent republic. While it's clear that this is not what he intended to portray, his poor wording was used against him by Devoy and Cohallan. His pamphlet was denounced as an offer of surrender to the English, and Devoy used his Gaelic American newspaper to publish numerous critical articles. While Joseph McGarrity and Dr. Patrick McCartan also disagreed with the president's wording, they publicly defended him in McGarrity's Irish press. To have done otherwise would have destroyed all the work that they had done since arriving in the United States. The battle lines were being drawn for the final conflict between the leaders of the Friends of Irish Freedom and De Valera's Irish delegation. By the end of February, De Valera felt it necessary to dispatch McCartan to Ireland with an explanation for Dáil Éireann. As well as accusing Devoy and Cohallan of jealousy and of attempting to wreck the bond drive, he explained that the aim of his pamphlet was to get the British government talking so that a settlement could be considered. Though some members were unsatisfied with the explanation McCartan presented to the cabinet, Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith eventually won them around, and a letter of support was given to him to publish in America. Collins, in particular, may have had his own reasons for keeping the president in the United States, as it allowed him to wage his intelligence war without interference. Dáil Éireann's support came as a great relief to De Valera as he continued to travel promoting the bond drive, and the public spat seemed to abate somewhat towards St. Patrick's Day when he took the salute from over 25,000 marchers at the New York City parade. The following day, the 18th of March, a major diplomatic coup was scored when the United States Senate met to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. An amendment was introduced and passed that when Ireland became independent, it would be granted immediate admission to the League of Nations. De Valera was ecstatic, but this all came to nothing. On the 19th of March, the Senate failed to ratify the treaty in its amended form. The United States would never join the League of Nations, severely weakening its ability to maintain world peace, and Ireland's last hope for inclusion in the treaty was dead. It's unknown if De Valera heard or even cared about this result, however. At the same time, he was back in New York fighting against his political enemies who had moved openly against him. Devoy and Cohallan had summoned dozens of influential members of the Irish American community to the Park Avenue Hotel, where they outlined their case against the Irish president. Cohallan alleged that De Valera would consult none, knew nothing of American history or politics, alienated by his arrogance those who had spent a lifetime in Ireland's service, lived in royal suites at hotels, wasting money raised to help the gallant people of Ireland, and spread discord in the ranks here where, before De Valera's arrival, the greatest solidarity and the greatest movement of the race in history had been attained. Devoy was equally scathing in his attack on De Valera. In December, he had accused him of planning to set up a separate organisation under his own control and repeated these claims, accusing the Irish delegation as being the enemies of the leaders of the race in America. The intention had been to hold the meeting without De Valera present, but supporters of his who had snuck in demanded that he be given a chance to defend himself. A call was made to his hotel, and shortly afterwards he arrived, flanked by even more supporters. De Valera accused Devoy and Cohallan of twisting his words in the Westminster Gazette to suit their own ends, and for the next 10 hours the men argued back and forth. Some scored the contest as a victory for De Valera, but, according to historian Dave Hannigan, De Valera's detractors viewed it very differently. One audience member even interpreted his performance as the bravado of somebody by then so power-hungry that he had become deranged. With the audience exhausted and the arguments going nowhere, a bishop in attendance eventually called on everyone to kneel and pray for reconciliation, after which the meeting broke up. Devoy and Cohallan had failed to deliver the killer blow to De Valera that they had planned, but they had severely weakened his standing amongst a large section of the Irish American community. De Valera now believed that, out of jealousy, these two men were prepared to destroy all the progress that had been made for Ireland if it would grant them a public victory over him. With a US presidential election due in November, the two major parties would be gathering shortly to appoint their candidates, and De Valera was no longer confident that he could work with the Friends of Irish Freedom to influence their policies on Ireland. He wrote to Dáil Éireann, stating that unless he was voted a sum of money to use independently of the other Irish American organisation, there was little that could be done to secure Irish recognition, ending any reason for him to remain in the United States. In his biography of the president, David McCullagh describes Dáil Éireann's response. With almost indecent haste, the ministry gave De Valera full discretion to spend between $250,000 and $500,000. It was almost as if they didn't want him back. While on the surface unity was maintained for the benefit of promoting the bond drive, the leadership of the Irish American movement was splitting apart, and the two groups would actively work against each other during the summer's Democratic and Republican conventions. Regardless of who was to blame for what, the Cuba incident and the meeting at the Park Avenue Hotel marked the beginning of a lengthy slide towards destruction, culminating in October with De Valera breaking off from the Friends of Irish Freedom to form a new organisation under his absolute control. By the start of March 1920, Eamon De Valera was halfway through his stay in the United States of America. Back home in Ireland, the War of Independence had entered a new phase, with IRA General Headquarters authorising attacks against RIC barracks, which were increasingly reinforced by oddly dressed recruits from Britain. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to be kept up to date with new episodes covering these events and the events of the emergency 80 years ago, when Ireland remained neutral during the Second World War. Accorda, thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.